This episode is brought to you by Hero Forge. Hero Forge offers fully customizable tabletop miniatures with dozens of fantasy races and thousands of parts to choose from. Their easy-to-use design tool lets you build your perfect miniature online using a fully 3D, in-depth character creator right in your web browser. Custom minis can be made in a variety of materials, including plastic and metal options. They also offer downloadable model files so you can 3D print your own unique designs at home. Hero Forge is constantly expanding their catalog of customization options, adding new parts every week and major features like races and custom posing on a regular basis. Visit heroforge.com to start designing your custom miniature today. And check back often, new content is added every week. This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Today on the show, I talked with game designer, writer, and podcaster Kristin Devine, who is an absolute delight. She's one half of Dice Up Games and one third of the Roll to Play podcast network, where she produces the Powered by the Players show. We sat down on November 6th and discussed how she went from homebrewing games to designing and writing for them, and then learning the ins and outs of podcast editing. Hi, Kristin. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I know you through some projects we're doing together, but for those who do not know you, could you please tell us who you are and what you do in the TTRPG space?
Sure. Hi, Amber. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to speak with you. Hi, I'm Kristin Devine. I am a game designer and writer, podcaster, and TTRPG player. I love all things RPG, and I'm in the space as much as possible. I am one half of Dice Up Games. My partner and I design games together. We have designed North Sea Epilogues, which was published by Garfield Games and Renegade Games. And I have written for Kids on Bikes, Teens in Space, Jingxi, Blood in the Banquet Hall, a few others. And then I am also one third of the Roll to Play podcasting network, where I produce a show called Powered by the Players. And then finally, I am a regular player in the Christmastide Ohio Kids on Bikes anthology actual play podcast. It's a mouthful.
And it's also so much. Like, I first met you through Powered by the Players, and because I'm currently on a show that I think will be released by the time this comes out. I don't know.
We can talk about it.
Okay. But so I know you from that, but like as I started following you on Twitter and seeing stuff, I did not realize how much that you do. Oh boy, we're off to a great start. All the stuff that you do. And so I'm always interested in like how people get their starts and things.
Sure.
So RPGs, when did you start playing? Or what was your first foray into the RPG world?
Right. So I played RPGs long before I knew there was this indie RPG space/community. I've only been a part of that for a couple of years now. I started playing RPGs in my early 20s, so a while ago. I played with my partner actually introduced me. It was really cool. When we first met, I introduced him to video games, which he had never played, and I played them growing up. And he introduced me to RPGs, which I unfortunately did not play until my early 20s. I feel like I missed out. I played for a long time and then had kind of a hiatus where we just didn't have a group. And then luckily we, about 5 or 6 years ago, found a big regular group, and we played 1 to 3 times a week for years. And it's actually how we ended up designing our first game. The Dice Up Systems, which was used for North Sea Epilogues, is a version of our homebrew that we designed for our table. We started playing D&D, but our home table grew to 8 to 10 players. And as you probably know, trying to do D&D for all it's good, trying to do D&D with 8 to 10 people is just...
I can't even imagine what the fight rounds were like.
Exactly.
All right, everybody, tonight all we're going to do is this one battle.
This one single battle. Yeah, we played a session where We played for like 3 hours, and I was a little mage, a gnome mage, and I went twice. And after that, I was like, I just spent 3 hours. So that inspired the homebrew. So yeah, so I've been playing for several years, and I don't know that much about D&D, to be honest. I've only played 20 times maybe. I'm much more familiar with the indie games. So I feel like I'm kind of opposite of a lot of people in that sense.
Well, then tell me about Dice Up. You said it was a homebrew version of D&D, or can you explain what Dice Up is?
Yeah, so it's setting agnostic. So it is a little crunchier. It's not like a one page, right, game. So there's definitely some mechanics to it, but you only roll a d20. Magic is extremely simple. There's challenge ratings, which that is actually in the North Sea epilogues. So instead of the GM rolling against the player, they basically set a challenge rating once the player describes what they want to do, and they tell the player what it is to allow the player to kind of adjust. We have surge points, which is something that's common, I think, in a few other games, where you can kind of add, to a modifier to your roll. So it is definitely, I guess, a little crunchier compared to some of the other games I've seen, but it is much, much easier to learn and pick up than a D&D or a Pathfinder, for sure.
Yeah. Yes. I was like, I play D&D 3.5 for 7 years straight, like twice a month, I think is what our sessions were. And yeah, it's when you get to those higher levels too, it turns into a the battles, right? And like I have seen you talk about this indie space, a lot of the times I don't want to say all of it is narrative driven, but right. I feel like when you think indie, you think the narrative stuff. Mm-hmm. So is that why you guys were interested in doing a homebrew? Is that what pushed you to do that?
Yeah, we were at the table that we were playing with. We were talking one night after a session about how we wanted to be able to accommodate 8 to 10 people, but be able to have more than one turn. And then we started talking about how we really wanted to play Star Wars. Like maybe we want to play a Star Wars type game. And then someone else wanted to play like a Vikings type game. And so Tim, my partner, actually had the idea first of like, what if we just started making our own game? And that way we could apply any setting we wanted to this one system. Any GM can pick it up and in 30 to 60 minutes know it. You can make characters and you can play, and you can either do like a longer one shot, a 3 to 4 hour one shot, or you can do a campaign with it. And so that's what made us start designing the game. And it actually ended up taking probably about a year, just in that we played it pretty quickly. Like we played it probably a couple weeks after we started designing it. But then you play test and things either break or you see an area for improvement. And so we made changes over, a year or so. And then we had like a really solid system that we used. And we gave it to a couple of friends at that same table who turned around and ran their own game. We had a friend who ran an Assassin's Creed themed game with it. So it ended up working out really well. And we didn't know if we'd ever publish it or not. So so we just designed it for our home table for our personal use.
And then you ended up publishing it, right?
Yeah. It's not published on its own. It's a version of it is what North Sea Epilogues, we designed it for North Sea Epilogues, a version of it. But because we worked with the publisher and it was Garfield Games IP, we did make some changes. We would like to publish it separately one day, but lots of projects.
Yes. Speaking of lots of projects, so were there more games that you have under Dice Up Games?
Yeah, we have some smaller games. So we have a couple of hacks, a couple of laser and feeling hacks that you can get, of course, for free on drive-thru. We have one that's called Wits and Chivalry. That is a like Monty Python British game where you either play a knight or you play a squire and then you switch. So everyone's always engaged at the table. We have a truth and daring that we actually put out as like, it's kind of like a Stranger Things feel. And we put that out before we had even heard about Kids on Bikes. But that's a 1-page hack. And then we have a couple of other smaller games as well. And then we have a few games that are still in the works that hopefully will be coming out in 2021.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah.
New
games, always.
Always. So then going from game design, you're homebrewing, and then to doing what you do for Dice Up now, how did roll to play become a thing? Like what went from like, oh, we're sitting doing 8 to 10 D&D players to making our own games, and now we're putting actual play content out there?
Right. So I believe, I cannot remember. Yes, I can. Okay. So Kent Blue still runs the Roll to Play podcast. And that's what it started out as. He hosts and GMs Roll to Play, where he basically invites a group of people. They play a one-shot or a mini campaign. He's been doing that since late 2017, I want to say. So in like January of 2018, Kent did like an open call on Twitter for players, and Tim and I played. And it was the first time I had ever played with Kent. Tim had played with him once before. And after that, we just became friends. And about a year later, Kent wanted to kind of expand on it being just Roll to Play podcast, although it's a fantastic show. He wanted to kind of be more, and we had some ideas, we being Tim and I. And so we were already friends. And so as a group, we kind of decided, let's make this a network and see what happens.
I think that's how a lot of networks happen. It's like, well, we have a good group of people and we like playing together and we're good. Let's try and build on this, because that's what I'm doing right now too.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's fun. I've been enjoying it. Have you been enjoying the Roll to Play, doing the network stuff?
Yes. Yeah. I occasionally host a show that it does not have a set release. We kind of use it. It's called Level Up, and we kind of use it, I guess, as needed for either extra shows or most often for interviews. And so I really enjoy interviews when I'm in your position, when I get to be the one asking the questions. I like hearing about other people and what they're doing in our space. So I enjoy that. And I really enjoy the Powered by the Players. I learned on the fly editing. And to be honest, I probably should have learned editing before I took on a podcast. But no, I just jumped in. I was like, I'll just edit this after we start playing. It's fine.
So your 3 is the Roll to Play is that there's 3 partners? Is that what's okay? So it's you, Tim, and Kent.
Yeah.
And so
aren't there 3 in yours as well?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
It's me, Dave, and Josh. And my role has been a lot of like the social, like networking stuff, and I do all the graphic design. So what kind of role do you like? What role have you assumed in the 3-friend business group?
I'm not very tech savvy. So I do a lot of the scheduling. I'm a scheduler. I like a lot of organization. So I put together when we ask people to play on or interview on any of our shows, I usually am the one that reaches out, which Kent and Tim sometimes feel bad about. They're like, we don't want you to do all the admin work, but I enjoy it and I'm pretty good at it. Like I'm okay at reaching out to people, explaining everything they need to know. Like you are like that with the game and the show, really letting people know what to expect. So I'm the organizer and the scheduler. And I also am kind of like a hype person. Like I really want to drive us to do like the next thing. Let's add a show this year. Let's start a Patreon. Like I'm the idea person.
I feel like you and I are like the same across the literally all the other board of the coast. I'm Midwest and you are coast. Yeah. So, oh, that's so funny. Cause like I'm here going, oh my gosh, this is what I do.
Yeah. You're like,
but I really
we need
enjoy
a new
it.
show. I do too.
And I think that's one of those things that when people think about, oh, I want to start a podcast or I want to start a network, they don't realize how many components go into all of that. You said the tech stuff is super like above my head too. Like, that's not my role. Like, nope. I'm not doing.
I don't manage our website.
Nope. No, thank you. I could make logos for it, but I'm not going to do any of the coding or programming for it.
Same.
But yeah, it's one of those things where you almost need like 3 or 4 people to do all of this. The scheduling thing is super important. The admin stuff is super important. And I think you have to really love those roles in order for it to work. So if you don't enjoy it, I don't know how long it's going to last, because I don't know about you, but I'm tired a lot of the time.
I'm forever tired.
Yeah, forever tired. So how long has Roll to Play been an entity?
Since May of 2019.
So a year and a...
Yeah.
Oh no, so we're coming on 2 years now.
God, that's why I struggled with, has it been a year and a half? Because time is very weird in 2020.
Extremely weird in 2020. I just realized, it just like hit me, it's November.
I know. November. We're in November already. It's very weird.
So what are the shows currently on the Roll to Play network?
Yeah. So we have the Roll to Play podcast, which is hosted and produced by Kent. We have What's Your Role, which was originally started by Tim, but now Jimmy Sprinkles runs it, which is such a fantastic name, by the way.
Yeah.
He hosts that show. And that show is, I had explained earlier about what the Roll to Play podcast is, but What's Your Role is a really fun interview show where people who do actual plays go on and get interviewed kind of in character. And I love hearing about, especially when you have a campaign, we all do this because we are passionate about storytelling. And so that people put a lot into their character and like background and relationships and bloopers, all of that stuff. And so that's what that show is about, is really talking to people more in depth about their show and about their characters and the background. So that's a fun one. And then, so Meeple Syrup is a board game design stream, and we host their podcast. So they have a lot of fans who wanted an audio version of their show. And so we host it. They have a separate Patreon and everything, but we host their show on our podcast network. And then we have Powered by the Players, of course. And Level Up is the show that I had mentioned earlier that doesn't have a set release, but we use it for like some different one-shots that maybe are run by different GMs that aren't Kent, and interviews and things like that. And then hopefully we'll be adding a new show next year, but I don't have enough details, so I don't want to say it just yet and jinx it.
All right. We won't talk about it. I know how it is. It's like, you have things in the work. There's the shadow projects that are like forming in the background. Wow, gosh. So you mentioned Christmastide, Ohio. That's not part of the Roll to Play?
That's not part of the Roll to Play network. I'm a player on that show. Yeah, Diana and Kate are the creators of that show.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So outside of Roll to Play, what other things can people find you on?
So Christmastide, Ohio is the only other actual play that I'm currently on, but I do a lot of writing for other games, and I do stream sometimes as well. I'm really getting into streaming when people will have me on their streams, because it's very different than podcasting.
It is very different.
It's very live and in the moment. I get a lot of nerves before a stream, or I don't really before a podcast. But I love it. I love playing games. So yeah, streams and writing projects when I can.
Streaming is a new territory that I've been delving in the last year and a half. And yeah, you're right. It is very different. From a network perspective, the reason why we chose to do streaming was because of the visibility. Is that something that your guys are also thinking about for Roll to Play?
Yeah, we've talked about that. We were talking about starting a stream earlier this year, and then when stuff happened in March, we just didn't really want to take on new projects like that, add more commitments. But streaming is definitely something I think that we will get into in the future.
Talking about the nerves and stuff of
Right.
before doing something live, you're right. It's very different. With a podcast, you can take that time to like think about and like have like dead air for like maybe like a good minute or two. But on a stream, it feels so.
You just can't.
It feels so wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas on a podcast or in a D&D game, it's or like just playing with your friends, pausing is no big deal. But for a live stream, it always feels so, like right now, just so like blah, blaring the silence.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting too. I want to say one of the first streams that I was on, I don't think it was the first, but one of the first was a Fiasco game that I played in. And I remember not fully understanding Fiasco. Thank goodness, by the way, that I didn't just fully grasp the piece where you are a director and that it is so improv. And I went into the stream just happy-go-lucky. This is going to be great. I know most of the people. And then they started explaining it and I was like, oh, this is improv. And I am here already on camera. So here we go. And the cool thing is that usually I feel really good when I'm done. And it's not that feeling of like, I'm amazing. It's the feeling of that was really fun. We told a great story together in real time with that pressure of not being able to pause. We did it. It was great. But I still get nerves, even though I know we're all in the same boat.
I feel like I will never get rid of those nerves. I think even before podcasting, I'm always getting that little bit of stage fright. I think that's just going to be inherent in my personality for forever. But
same.
So you've played a lot of different indie games. You've talked about Fiasco, Kids on Bikes, which you've written for too, right?
Yes.
Is there this is Kristin's jam, this is my favorite game I've played, I can't wait to play it, I would always want to be playing this game?
Yes, there are a couple, not in order, not in any particular order. Monster Hearts is just, I love everything about it.
It's a beautiful game. It's
fantastic. It's a beautiful game, and I want to play it again so that I can play a different playbook every time until I've played, all of them or almost all of them. I just think it's a fantastic game. And then I'm starting to feel that way about Fiasco simply because you can play so many different play sets. And so the replayability is pretty fantastic. So I think those two games are probably top of my list. I'm comfortable playing pretty much anything PBTA as well. And there's so many good PBTA games, like, Monster of the Week. There's just so many of them. But I think even if I were busy, if someone said, do you want to play a game of Monster Hearts or a game of Fiasco? I pretty much would play those anytime.
Those are really two great choices. I also love Monster Hearts, and Fiasco for me, when I first approached it, and maybe you could talk about it too, going from something like D&D to Dice Up, which is a little bit more crunchy, to going to basically no dice, here are cards with prompts, was terrifying to me.
Yeah.
Did you feel the same way the first time you played Fiasco?
Oh yeah, and I have played the dice version. I've played the dice version, and I'm actually running the dice version for an upcoming podcast. But same idea as the cards. I mean, it's the same in that the parameters are so loose. You build one or two relationships and a few objects and a location and a need, and you have a rough idea of what time period you're in and maybe what's going on. And then that's it. And then you just have multiple scenes to create everything about your character. And I think what's hardest for me is when my character takes the spotlight in a game, I really want it to be organic. And so when it's my turn in Fiasco to have a scene where I'm directing, and I know that it's 1 in maybe 4 chances of my character getting to be in the spotlight and developing their background or the story, I feel that extra bit of pressure, if that makes sense, because I'm like, oh, I better make this good. So yes, to go from a game like D&D where you have a list of things you pretty much know that you can do. And in my experience, DMs often describe outcomes for you. I've noticed that a lot, which is not, I'm not saying that's a negative thing at all, but obviously in games like Fiasco or indie games, you as the player often are in charge of your own narrative. So there is definitely a lot of pressure though. I'm with you. So we talked about my favorite games, like what are your jam games? So do you have one or more that you can tell me about?
Oh, gosh. So if anybody follows me on Twitter or knows anything that I do, Ryutama is like my absolute jam. Aesthetically, mechanically, everything about it world-wise is like, I describe it as Oregon Trail meets a Studio Ghibli film. So you're traveling and you have like fantastical little creatures and storytelling, but it's all about traveling and exploring. And to me, that is like, so good. I like environmental storytelling, and it really pushes that in its mechanics and in its character classes and everything. And then I also really, really love The Warren right now.
No.
Oh, the show that you are on currently when this airs that I'm running for you. Because the same thing. It's powered by the apocalypse. It's collaborative storytelling. You're asking the players to help build this world with you. And it's rabbits, and I like nature storytelling. And those are my two right now, I would say. Ryutama and The Warren. But I also really love Monster Hearts. Powered by the Apocalypse games to me are like just crunchy enough and narrative focused that it feels good when I play those games.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, powered by the players, was that an you idea to do the show, or was that a Morgan idea, or how did Powered by the Players come to exist?
Yeah, so Powered by the Players, I had been talking with Diana about, I really wanted to do a podcast where we highlighted female voices. So I either wanted, and Diana was immediately on board. So we worked together to brainstorm, would it be all female GMs, designers, cast, illustrators, all of the above? Like, how do we frame this so that it's clear and that we can have it be sustainable, right? It felt important to me to highlight female voices and also great games, right? And great players. And then I went to Big Bad Con, and I had already known Morgan, but I met Morgan in person, and we were talking, and I said, why do I not know of a podcast that just plays through every Powered by the Apocalypse game? Because there are so many, they're not stopping. Like, no one's going to suddenly stop making them. You're not going to run out of content. And and I know there's a lot of wonderful podcasts that play PBTA games, but I didn't know of one that just rotated through as many as possible with a rotating cast. And so when I talked to Morgan and Diana, I told Diana the idea, and she was on board. And then when we all talked, of course, it was all important to us that we still keep diversity as part of it. So we, instead of highlighting only female voices, because that in itself felt like it might still be too exclusive, we are trying to highlight as many diverse voices as possible in every cast. So, and in highlighting or in doing a rotating cast, it also felt like a good way to, I like hyping people in this space. I really do. And so it felt like a good way to hype people, to get people on, to meet new people, and to be able to hype their current projects and future projects. It just felt like that community type building. And I know that the word community in the indie space, it's not always used, but I like the idea of our podcast being a little bit of a community or a safe space.
I also feel like having rotating casts and trying to highlight and diversify and all that stuff also is a good way just to meet people. And especially this year, not going to conventions, not meeting people face to face. I mean, that's part of the reason why I wanted to do the Ward. And it's like, I'm really bad at talking with people of my own volition. Come play a game with me. That's how I get to know people. I want to play games with you. And that's what I've been feeling with Powered by the Players too, playing in your guys's current ongoing whatever time is. So I'm alluding to that I'm on the show.
Yes.
But prior to the one that I'm on, how many systems have you guys done already?
So we have played, so we have a mini masks campaign, a Bluebeard's Bride one shot, a Monster of the Week mini campaign that have been released so far. The next one coming up is Escape from Dino Island one shot, and then the one you're on, so Carnival Crossroads mini campaign. So the way we are working it is a mini campaign, a one shot, a mini campaign, a one shot.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's smart. And you're the editor for this entire show?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
I feel for you.
Yeah, I love editing.
Oh,
Let me just say that. And
Okay.
I will complain about it specifically to other editors because I feel like they know my pain in editing.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, there is something, for me not being a tech person, there is something about being able to string together an episode or pull out, I don't know, there is something about putting together an episode. It's like a tangible thing that I did that gives me the sense of accomplishment once it's done. And I am not a expert or fantastic editor. I've only been doing it for about a year, but I really enjoy it.
I when you were talking about this like satisfaction, the only thing that I was thinking about is like when I mow the lawn. Where it's just satisfying when it's like all done, and even like the process of just like trimming and getting it like nice and even. Oh, same kind of feeling, I think. Or that's the only thing that comes to my mind right now. Just mowing the lawn. I don't know why, but I think I get that same kind of feeling.
And you don't edit because you mentioned an editor.
I do edit.
Oh, you do?
I used to edit my entire show, Shapeshift.
Wow.
I am a perfectionist. And it was killing me.
Sure.
Because it was taking so much time.
Yeah. It takes a lot of time.
It takes so much time. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast, listener, and you don't have an editor lined up,
find one.
Find someone to teach you prior, because it does take a long time. I feel like an actual play is the worst.
Yes.
When you have 5 channels of audio, and you have crosstalk.
Yes.
Have you had to train people or teach people who are not used to recording for a podcast how to be on a podcast, like as recording? Or is that something you're like, haven't had to deal with really?
So when we did Masks, the cast of Masks, everyone had been on an actual play before or was currently on an actual play. So that was fantastic.
Nice.
It was a great group. And to be honest, every group has been a great group, which is, I feel so lucky about that. I feel like every time I meet someone to play a game with, it's a good experience. So, but what I did realize is that I needed to, as the editor, set some expectations. So, or do little things on my end. So for example, we would all get on the Zoom call and I would hit record and then we would talk for 30 minutes and future Kristin had to edit that out. And so now I've learned, okay, we get on, you do the normal talking that you want anyways, because you're connecting as humans. You want to check in and see how everyone's doing. If you've played multiple times together, then you're becoming friendly. And so you want to hear about how everyone else is doing. So I've learned not to hit record until we're going to start playing. But I definitely have tried to set expectations for things like scheduling and situations like that. Of course, life happens. And when you get right down to it, this is only gaming. You know, it is a hobby, but still trying to be as organized as possible and set expectations, not a bunch of rules, but just, I feel like almost everyone does better when they kind of know what to expect and have some sort of idea of, this is the length of time we're recording and we're going to take a break and here's how it's going to look. I think everyone eases into that a little better. And when we started Masks, I was definitely more like, great, see you Saturday. And so now I've learned tons of communication is key. And I should have known that. And I didn't in the beginning.
Well, how can you know what you don't know, right?
It's
like, it's what I say all the time. You can't know what you don't know. And I feel like a lot of times when people go into thinking, oh, I'm going to record my friends around the table playing a game and we're going to make this actual play podcast, they don't think about recording etiquette or mic etiquette, which has been something that my home group has struggled with. When you're used to sitting around a table eating snacks while you're playing D&D, you cannot do that while there's a microphone in front of your mouth, because it is an editing nightmare.
Yes, it is.
Oh my gosh.
Typing on your keyboard, rustling through your notes, all of that becomes, or things that you don't think about unless you have edited. So if you record on Zoom and you have six people and someone mutes their mic while it's not their turn, Zoom truncates that. And so now your tracks don't line up.
I recently learned about that.
I'm sorry.
Because I had no idea. I was like, oh, it's going to record the entire thing. But yeah, I pulled in episodes for the Warren of Pellow Grove and I was like, why is this track 30 seconds shorter?
Yep.
Why is this track 2 minutes shorter?
Yeah.
And it truncates it in a way that's like, just doesn't take it off the end. It truncates it literally.
Yes.
Where
so conversations will start running into each other. It is,
a nightmare I have experienced, which is why I'm so tired.
I bet. Which is why, listener, if Amber was not clear enough, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, find an editor or learn first. Learn from my mistake.
So one of the things that I liked about like what we're doing now in Crossroads is that I feel like you've planned out pretty far ahead. Like you have a huge backlog of audio. Listener, another great thing to do.
Yes. You're right, Amber. Go on.
Was that something that you went into thinking when you did Powered by the Players, or was that a learning from something in the past?
Thank goodness for Kent. So Kent Blue, if you're listening to this, thank you. Kent had run Roll to Play Pod for so long by the time I started that he said, bank your audio. Bank it as long as you can. Like get a whole campaign done before you start releasing. Kristen, though, was like, I can probably start releasing after like 3 or 4 episodes. Luckily, because we release bi-weekly, which again, advice I got from great podcasters was start bi-weekly. You can always go weekly. It's harder to swing the other way. And it's a lot of editing pressure to release an episode once a week. So I ended up, because of how we did our scheduling, I ended up being about 2 or 3 months ahead, which is great. And so we actually now, although we will continue to release episodes bi-weekly, our Powered by the Players team gets to take a break for the holidays so that we can do other projects and I can catch up on editing. So it really worked out well that way.
So smart. So much smarter.
Did you do that when you edited, or like, did you bank episodes?
I did not. In fact, I did not so bad that I was editing audio on my vacation in Florida to get my release schedule. I did do bi-weekly though. Bi-weekly is smart. I did not do that for the Warren of Petal Grove. Again, don't be Amber, don't be a perfectionist, because I'm like, oh, all I'm going to do is I'm going to rip the audio from the stream, cut it in half, put it up there. But because I like tight audio editing with the spaces taken out and as much ums and weird like sounds as possible, I found myself editing more than I should have been editing. Sure. And I was planning on doing it weekly, and now I am behind.
How do you feel editing yourself?
So when I first started, and this again for a listener, if you're worried about hearing yourself because you don't like listening to yourself talk, it was awful. I hated it when I first started because every vocal tick or crutch word feels so loud when you hear it from yourself because you're super critical of yourself. And it actually gave me anxiety before editing audio to hear myself. Yeah. Especially because when I get excited, I talk faster. And when I
Same.
talk faster, I start to slur my words and then I sound slurpy. And then I don't, because I wasn't trained at the beginning to re-say things. I didn't have good cuts afterwards. And so I just had to deal with my slurpiness.
Right.
Same for you?
Same. I have a couple of things that I do once I'm in game that it's the way I speak, or it's things that I do right before I start speaking. And I can not only hear it so loud, like you said, which is why I was smiling and nodding. Not only can I hear it so loud, but I can see it when I'm editing. I can see it coming, the spike in the audio, and I'm just like, Kristin!
That's so funny because I know the waveform of my
So true.
It's such a weird thing to see. You're like, oh, I don't even have to think about cutting it. It's just, oh, that's my
There it is. Yes.
There it is. Cut out. It's so funny because I did get better over time. I think one of the things about my philosophy, the reason why I even did a podcast, the reason why I am doing what I'm doing now is because I always want to get better. And so if you're nervous about listening to yourself, after about the 20th hour of editing myself, I got over it.
Yep. Yeah. I feel the same way, that you get over it, and that once you start to learn more about editing or think of the show or the episode as a whole, like when I'm editing, obviously I'm pulling out a few I don't pull out everything because I want people to sound natural. Mm-hmm. But you pull out the long silences, some of the out of game questions or tangents that we all do. And after a while, I started thinking, okay, do I put music here? Is this a good place to cut the episode? I just said, that type of thing. And so it really helped me not focus so much on myself and be hypercritical of myself, but I was able to learn to look at the episode as a whole and what the end goal was and edit it from that standpoint instead of just being mad that I was saying again.
Have you ever surprised yourself listening back to audio and been like, wow, I sound really good?
There have been a couple of times where I have forgotten something that happened in a game and I've thought, oh yeah, that was a pretty good response. I don't often think back on games that way unless I'm editing. So that is a nice thing where you can occasionally be like, oh, hey, that was a pretty good response I did, or that was a great interaction me and this other player had. That is a really nice part about editing, I think. Did you ever have that?
Oh, yeah. There's some times where I've said something in an NPC voice or delivered something in NPC and I thought, oh, that sounds garbled, or that sounded really chunky or just not clunky, And I've listened back and was like, wow, that was actually not as bad as I thought. So start out high anxiety, worrying about things. And I think over time, it's actually, maybe it's just a growth thing, maybe I'm just getting better and then I'm hearing it now. And hopefully it just sticks in my head, especially in interviews. Mm-hmm. This is a whole new thing to me. Everybody who's listening to Tabletop Babble, I've never done an interview show before. I've talked about that.
Really?
And one of the things about me in conversation is I tend to, when someone's talking, oh yeah, gotcha. All right, gotcha's my huge hang-up word. And the first interview I did, there was like 50, 60 conversation affirmation noises, I guess, I made. It was just so much.
Yeah.
And so I've been learning, and maybe the listeners, as you're listening through all the Tabletop Babble episodes going forward, might hear me get a little bit better with that.
I do this. I do this when the GM is talking and explaining something. I want them to know that I'm listening and that I understand. And I will say, and then later hear myself during this wonderful monologue or this wonderful explanation that the GM is giving. Morgan is like knee deep into reading her Bluebeard's Bride story. And I'm like, which I then have to try to edit out. And And because we're on video, I could just nod at her, give a thumbs up, which is what I'm trying to do now. But it took me a while because I want people to know that I'm listening, like you said, and I do that. And not great for audio later.
And no one, of course, can see us, but I have been doing hand gestures and nodding and like making exaggerated facial expressions at Kristin this entire time.
I've been giving thumbs up. We are very similar, Amber.
It's so funny because it's like you, again, going back to the whole process of making a podcast, it's one of those things where you go into it thinking, oh, it's just recording my friends. And then over time, you're like, oh my God, there's just so much more to it than I ever thought. Yes. So what has been maybe a challenging or a podcast woe, if you're willing to share, that you've experienced, if you could impart more wisdom onto somebody?
I feel like so much of it for me, because I edit Powered by the Players, has to do with editing. And before I started Powered by the Players, I was already helping with scheduling for Kent's show or for Tim's show. And I'm naturally an organizer and a planner. And so I feel like that I didn't have a lot of challenges necessarily there. So I think most of it comes down to, and I guess this is an editing. My biggest challenge, I think, that we haven't talked about yet was helping set expectations for the whole cast, including the GM. So anyone who's listening to this, Morgan Nuncio is the GM for Powered by the Players. They are phenomenal, and they are on many other shows, so you should follow them. However, not speaking at all to Morgan and her ability to run a fantastic game, she had also never done a podcast. And so she didn't know that she needed to give me a clean intro and a clean outro or retake a rule. She had no idea. And I didn't have any idea until I was in editing. And I was like, oh, we didn't clearly start this game. We were kind of talking, and then the game started, but there was no very clear, we are now entering a production, if that makes sense. And so I think as soon as we had that talk, because our team meets after every single campaign and mini campaign to kind of go over, pros and cons and what we want to change. As soon as I mentioned it, she's been fantastic. But none of us knew that going into it. So I think when I edited part of Masks, I was like, oh man, if I had just set that, if I had just mentioned that I need that in editing, it would have been so much cleaner from the start. But again, like you said, you don't know what you don't.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. And I think you said something I really liked, where you guys meet as a group after each game and talk about pros and cons. That's awesome. Because I feel like that's, again, I'm very growth driven. And I think that's the only way you're going to get better is if you talk about it with each other and set those expectations and learn from your experience together. Because, yeah, that's definitely one. Let me talk about this a little bit. Yeah. So I have a little bit of social anxiety, and I really don't like imposing on people. And so going into a role where I had to say, okay, I need you to give me 3 cuts of that, or like do this, it feels awkward at first. Did you experience that same kind of feeling of like, I don't really want to taskmaster this, like come on guys, because it feels like you're taking away from the fun,
Right. And that is the big difference, I think, one big difference between playing a game with your friends and creating an actual play podcast, because I absolutely had a difficult time doing that. And there are times when you have to. I'm comfortable now finally retaking something myself. Even when I first started doing that, it felt awkward for me. Everyone heard me say it in the game. I just stumbled. That would be fine at a regular table, but it's not fine for the podcast. So I have to say, hold on, let me retake that and start over again. It feels awkward. I've gotten used to that a little bit more myself, but asking other people to do it, it does. I I do not ever like to feel bossy. I just don't want people to think that I'm bossing them around. And so that is a difficult role for me. So yes, and the thing is though, is most of the time when you're recording a podcast and you've either told people what to expect from the podcast or they've been on, podcasts before, they're completely open to it. They are.
Definitely.
It's just getting over it yourself of having to take on that role. Yeah.
Whew. Yeah, I feel that. I think doing it for 3 years has obviously helped, and you've been doing it for a while now too. But yeah, man, editing. We've talked like 25 minutes about editing alone.
I'm sorry we went off on an editing tangent. It's a lot. Though.
It's a huge thing that I don't think people think about.
Agreed.
And I want to shine light on those editors out there because I appreciate you. I appreciate you, Dave. I appreciate all the editors because it takes up. I don't think I could be doing my other shows if I didn't have an editor editing my other podcasts.
Sure.
Because it just takes up so much time.
It does. Absolutely. It does. I definitely have to, for as I know in the beginning you had said that you weren't aware that I do so much in the RPG space, but I have to be very careful about what I take on. Like I can only do one writing project at a time because I have my editing commitment. And yes, it's all stuff that I want to do. Absolutely. I love all of it in different ways, but the editing piece does take up a lot of time. And so once you've set yourself to that commitment, it is a time suck. So you have to be ready for that, I think.
Yeah, I also want to be doing everything at once, but I need to calm down because I'm at my limit, I think. So is there anything that you do currently that you like more than other things? Like if is editing the thing that you really enjoy? Is writing the thing you really enjoy? Where are you at there?
For as much as I enjoy editing, writing is my number one. Aside from being a player, which I think anyone who's doing anything in this space probably loves being a player, right? I think that's probably pretty standard. Aside from that, writing adventures or creating worlds or species, anything with other people's games. I do like designing games, but I feel like my joy and probably a little bit of my strength is currently most in writing. Although I'm very similar to you in that growth is hugely important to me. And so I probably spend more time doing the things that I feel I need to improve at. But yeah, definitely writing is a big passion.
So I think I saw recently that you're looking for writing projects currently.
I am looking for writing projects currently. It was so nice when I tweeted that. I got a lot of retweets, for me at least. And I did have someone DM me. So that's awesome. So it's so nice. I love that about the RPG space. I feel like if you genuinely put yourself out there and you're not an a-hole, then people want to see more good people do good things in this space. And so that was really nice to see. But yeah, I'm always looking for writing stuff or to be a player, to be on a stream. I have kids and a full-time job. And so this is pretty much my one hobby. And in this pandemic, especially, it is my one way to socialize with other adults. And to go off on a slight tangent now, sorry, just real quick. I saw the other day someone post that playing, and I don't remember who it was. I can't credit them because I don't remember their name, but that playing RPGs with someone is one of their love languages. And I 100% think that's a love language. Like spending your time playing a game with other good humans is a big deal.
I feel the same way. Like I told you, it's how I make friends. It's how I get to know somebody by playing games with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I think that was a good note to end on. Playing games is a love language. So if people want to find you online and your work, where could they do that?
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Kristin is no Jedi. You can also find me at PBT Players on Twitter. DiceUpGames.com is where you can find all my game design and my writing. And RollToPlayNetwork.com is where you can find all of our podcasts and our show information for the network.
Awesome. That was such a good chat. I'm so glad that you came on.
Thanks for having me, Amber. It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at Rocket Orca, Kenny as at Wolfmere, and John is at Crossways GM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards. This episode is brought to you by Kobold Press and Tome of Beasts 2, now available on the Kobold Press store. The publisher of the original smash hit Tome of Beasts, Kobold Press, wrangled a new horde of wildly original, often lethal, and highly entertaining 5e compatible monsters to challenge new players and veterans alike. The Tome of Beasts 2 will bring 400 new monsters to 5th edition, from angelic enforcers, Sasquatch and shriekbats, to psychic vampires, zombie dragons, and so much more. In addition to the Tome of Beasts 2 hardcover volume and PDFs, you can get monster pawns, VTT versions, and monster layers with beautiful maps. It also includes the work of Don't Split the Podcast Network's Celeste Konowich and James Introcaso. Find out more on koboldpress.com.